Well, welcome to the fifth of eight videos looking at the human resource frame. And during this particular video, we're going to continue to look at basic human resource strategies. And during this particular video, we're going to look at how do we empower employees and how do we promote diversity. So this just builds on the last video and allows us to continue to explore these basic human resource strategies. I'm going to warn you ahead of time, a couple of cartoons coming up that take a contrarian view to these strategies. So let's start off with one. One of the first things that you want to do in keeping and empowering employees is this idea of investing in employees, investing in their learning, and setting up the organization to be a learning organization. And as you recall, we talked about that earlier when we were talking about the structural frame, and here it is again, back in human resource frame, looking at how do we set up a learning organization? How can we build a structure that allows mentors and time off from work, if you will, or time not doing their production job to mentor other employees and make them better? How can we set up a managerial system that allows people to try new things? And you got to understand this trying of new things, that innovation thing, sometimes that fails, and the managers are putting themselves at risk when they do that. So there are some managers out there that are going to resist that. And then finally, you've got to build the communications within the team so that it becomes a learning organization and we learn from our mistakes. We can sense the environment. And again, that, you know, in a YouTube video it sounds so trivial, but within a company it's hard. It's hard to build the communication pipes so that you're sensing what's going on in the environment, you're acting decisively on those changes in the environment, and the organization is learning and moving forward. All right, let's move off of, this is the last bit of keeping employees. Let's move now to empowering employees. And the first thing we're going to talk about is this idea of providing information and support to empower employees. And one idea that's out there is called open book management. And you can see the three kind of underlying premises behind open book management. This idea that all employees at every level should see and learn and understand the financial and performance measures of the company, what's being measured. They need to start thinking like employees so they can improve those numbers. And if they're successful in doing that, everybody has a piece of the action. Well, again, we've got a cartoon up there that takes a contrarian view, but there are kind of three reasons why this works. First, it builds trust because you're being transparent about what things are being measured and how they count. It's a powerful incentive because the employees get a piece of the action. They get to prosper as the company prospers, and it helps inform decision making because you get lots of feedback through this type of a system. All right, let's look at another one. In this case, we're talking about keeping employees by empowering employees through autonomy and participation. And it talks here about why it works, and very similar reasons. Again, we're enhancing organizational learning. And then some of the reasons why it fails. This is kind of difficulty in designing workable systems, and managers don't really think it's going to work. So let's go over, if we can, to the right here. You see a kind of interesting picture of workers who are building toys. And this story comes from 1955, and White related, where you had this factory. And the workers were paid based on how many toys they could produce, and everyone had low morale. It's very similar to the Charlie Chaplin assembly line routine. Lots of drudgery associated with that process. And so as the story goes, and it forms a cycle, there was low morale. And part of that low morale is because the hygiene factors of the company, the temperature was so hot, and so they got new fans installed. They were successful and convincing the managers to install new fans. That led to higher morale. Higher morale led to them looking at it and coming back and saying, well, if we've had success in getting a fan, perhaps we can get a variable belt speed, so that as the tools are coming down the belt, rather than it being at a fixed rate, it can be variable, and certain times we'll go slower and certain times we'll go faster. Well, that led to much higher pay. They were actually extremely successful with this variable belt rate by giving the employees some autonomy in the process. But unfortunately, it led to jealousy from other teams that were much more experienced but were not producing as well as the ladies. They fixed the belt, moved it back to, well, fixed it if you were from the perspective of the jealous workers. They moved it back to being a fixed rate belt, and that led to everyone quitting. So they had an experiment with autonomy. It worked up until the point that the managers wouldn't pack it. They were or back it. They were not willing to support it, and that led to them going back. And then you have this full cycle where you get low morale now because everyone has quit. All right, let's move on to another mechanism for doing this, and that is redesigning the work, taking those tasks that are simple, repetitive, and low skill, moving them so that they're designed up, and we build in some mechanisms that allow workers more freedom and autonomy, more feedback, and greater challenges than repetitively doing the same thing over and over and over again. In looking at this redesign, Hackman suggested that there were three critical factors in design. First, you got to see the work as being meaningful and worthwhile. Second, employees have to be able to use discretion and feel accountability based on the use of discretion. And then finally, they need feedback so that they can improve. If you've got these three factors, you can put into place redesigns that make sense and empower employees. There are some barriers to this, and again, some of these should come as no surprise. Some simple repetitive work has become efficient and cheap because we're using technical means to do that. The belief in theory X always kind of gets in the way because it's the the counter argument, if you will, to empowering employees. Major investments are needed to redesign physical plant and machinery, and sometimes companies are willing to do that and sometimes they're not. And then that last bullet, it's that cultural change. You're going to have to change system-wide and look at the world a different way if you're moving down this path of empowering employees. And that requires your managers thinking about the world a different way. All right, well, let's go look at perhaps the height, if you will, of empowering employees. Let's look at these self-managing teams. And in this particular case, oops, there we go. Look at self-managing teams, and of course we've got a little cartoon arguing the exact opposite argument instead of self-managing teams. But this idea that the org chart's not some hierarchy, but instead it's a set of interconnected teams. Teams have a meaningful role, and they have ample autonomy and collective accountability against that role. And then you need group skills and a broader range of technical skills. So everyone's going to have to be able to perform someone else's tasks. And again, you get, higher level skills being performed. And again, if you go back, we had talked about it earlier. Look at the Saturn cars. Those were examples of self-managing teams that were very successful for a period of time until management got back in the way of the success that the company was having. All right, let's look now at an extreme case, if you will, of these kind of self-managing teams and trying to minimize the effect of other forms of leadership. So there's a company called Silmer, based out of Brazil, and you can see the kind of four key components of the company, of their culture. The first of which is the key to management is to get rid of all the managers. That's interesting. So it's building a larger, going back to Mintzberg, a larger operating core. The key to get work done on time is stop wearing a watch. In other words, in power, don't measure. So that means your techno component in Mitzberg's hierarchy, again, is going to get minimized. Best way to invest corporate profit is to give it to the employees. So they get a share. And then the purpose of work is not to make money. The purpose of work is to make the employees feel good about life. A much more holistic look, trying to build trust and loyalty in those employees. All right, let's go to the last slide in this short video. Talks about diversity and makes the argument, and the book does as well, that it's good business to promote diversity. Having that diversity of thought, having that diversity of perceptive increases the financial viability of a company. It is that diversity that drives us to experiment and try new things. And they talk about a couple of different ways in terms of addressing that, diversifying the candidate pool, making sure that you have adequate representation before you close a job, building mentoring programs that allow people to progress, tying executive bonuses back to the success of these types of initiatives, eliminating glass ceilings and providing role models that show that you can succeed and move forward in a particular company. Some of those role models are going to come from the board of directors, and that has a great symbolic effect on the company. And then finally, buying from minority vendors helps seed that growth and helps build a diverse supply chain and workforce. Well, wow, 12 minutes later, and here we are. We have finished up kind of looking at a couple of different techniques associated with basic human resource strategies. We started out by hiring the right people, keeping them, investing in them, empowering them, and promoting diversity. So we've really covered a lot of ground during this video and the previous video. And what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to go forward and start looking at organizational development and interpersonal dynamics. So join me in the next video as we continue to look at the human resource frame.